welcome to Paperback Flicks. Well, welcome back. I feel like it's been a little longer than normal, but I'm Rae Davidson, in case anyone has forgotten. I'm here with
RJ Craddock or Ruth.
Yeah.
Today I'm RJ Craddock.
Today she's RJ Craddock. We are actually going to be talking about her work. I have only the first one with me at the moment. Oh, let's get it in focus. And also it's backwards. But 13 Tribes of Cain, that I tend to always say wrong.
Yes, it used to have a different name, so I totally understand. I did that to you.
I have the original, and so it actually had the old series on it.
Yeah.
So
you have one of the Flying Jenny's OG
I had the little Easter egg
collector items.
Yep, that's right. And my daughter has the second one. I don't know I don't know what's on my second one because it's in her room and I didn't want to go in there.
The reason you don't want to go in your daughter's room, or is it like a rule you can't, or is it?
Oh no, I can, but when she's not here to, like, I feel weird going into her room. So unless it's a need, I just don't.
Do you like respect their privacy and stuff or something, or?
Most times.
Weird.
More than I probably should.
All right. I thought you were gonna say that maybe that it was like really disgusting in their room and it was just so awfully gross. You're like, I don't want to go in there.
So not usually, although it was kind of funny because last week she we're getting ready for school and she suddenly comes out of her room and she has this tray of acorns on it, and I'm like, the heck? And she's like, I'm putting it outside. I know. And she goes and she puts it outside. And I'm like, that's weird. Where did she get acorns? Also, why did she have a tray of acorns? And then her dad, hours later, comes out of his office and he shows me the text. He's like, here, you can read this now. And it's this whole conversation they had where she's like, I got acorns when we went camping and I brought them home and I didn't realize they had weevils in them. Mom is going to freak out. I put them outside, but there might be weevils in my room. Don't tell her until you make sure that it's all cleaned up in there. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm glad that they were like, let's just not make mom have to deal with this, but also
you keeping secrets from me? There's weevils in my house? How dare you?
Yeah, we are weevil free, but yuck.
Good.
Anyway,
that's funny.
So moving on to the actual book. So is book 3 ready to go, or am I?
Book 3 will be coming out December 10th. So that's something to look forward to. So kind of right before Christmas,
Okay.
Birthday.
Perfect.
My Christmas present for yourself, unless your birthday is around Christmas, like half the people in my family are. So like my husband and 2 of my sons. So it's sort of a Christmas birthday thingy for us.
Where I brought yours out and I was rereading them for this. And then my daughter was like, oh yeah, you were gonna let me read those. I'm like, sure. But not right now, because I'm
reading them. When I'm not, then you can.
Right. Which is why the second one is in her room right now, because that's where we were. She's like, so I can take this now? I guess so. So why don't we have you kind of describe the series generally and then kind of tell us what you want to tell us, especially about the first book, because I feel like the series generally is cool, but what really gets you is when you read the first book and you're like, that was awesome, I want more.
That's how it's supposed to work. Yes.
Right.
So yeah, 13 Tribes of Cain series follows Gwen, or Guinevere, and she's this young girl. She's found wandering in the woods when she's 5 years old. She speaks some strange language no one's ever heard of, and unbeknownst to everybody else, she has powers or abilities, but they can't find out where she came from, so she goes in an orphanage and the story sort of unfolds from there. You know, her figuring out why she's different from everybody, and trying to figure out who she is, and the stories about her journey to finding her lost home, family, and answers to our own identity. And yeah, so
It's one of those coming of age meets save or destroy the world, rule the world.
yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Uh, so I like that, like, I had forgotten about this, but in the very beginning, like, you start out with magic. We had talked about that with Harry Potter, how I liked that you are introduced to, like, the Dursleys and the, like, mundane world, and then you're like, but wait, but magic. And then on the movie, they were just like, oh yeah, this is magic. And they kind of started you there. And I was like, I kind of liked that they just like dropped you in that world. And that's, I had forgotten that that happens in this.
Hmm.
That, like, you know, from the beginning, you're like, oh, I'm dealing with magic.
With
So
the prologue, yes. So this is one of
yeah.
those instances where it's really important to read the prologue. I mean, you can not read the prologues in the books because it does follow a separate storyline, but it ends up weaving into the main one as you go. And plus, it kind of hints to the background. And like, if you're paying attention, what's happening in the prologue, you start to sort of piece together the puzzle a little bit before she even really gets it. So
Right.
it's kind of like little breadcrumbs, but it's definitely so it's kind of like my ice monster prologue, which is a term I learned in a writer's conference once, where people were talking about if you're not going to have I forget who the speaker was. I'm sorry. I think he's semi-famous now, but anyways, this was in Utah a long time ago. But she was talking about how if you're not going to introduce magic right away, and you're going to have it kind of come in a little later, one of the things you can do is like what R.R. Martin, the Song of
I
Fire and Ice,
yeah.
Game of Thrones author. I haven't read the books. I was told that they're even more like naughty and crazy than the series. So I'm like, that's naughty and crazy enough. So I think I'm good. But I hear are great. Anyways, one of the things he did is what they call the Ice Monster prologue. Is he did a prologue that kind of gave this sense of the White Walkers and this little otherworldly other thing going on before you get into the story, and then you meet the Starks, and it's like all these houses, these people, and it's very ordinary up until you get to the point where dragons show up. And you're
Right.
like, eventually there will be dragons and like kind of magical things and zombie people. But anyway, so it's kind of what I was doing there, and sort of giving you an introduction to, hey, there's magic going on over here. Hey, this is happening at the same time that regular human stuff is going on over here, modern day stuff.
Right.
And oh, hey, this little girl who might be from that world is just wandered into this world, and now we're gonna see what happens with her. So yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. I like that.
every prologue actually for every book actually picks up where the last one ends. So it's gonna ultimately, by the time you get to the end of this series, you're gonna totally understand where that other story comes into play with Gwen's story.
Okay.
It's
That's
a
pretty cool.
master plan. It's all figured out.
Excellent.
Just
See, and I sometimes wonder if that's like necessary. That's one of those missing elements in my brain. We've talked about like how like artists seem to see the painting, or they talk, who was that? Who did David? Is that Michelangelo?
mm-hmm,
How he's like, "Oh, David was already there. I just chipped away everything that wasn't David." Or they're
mm-hmm.
like you're just saying, where you're like, there's this and there's this and it all comes together, and by the end you're like, I know it all now, I understand it all. I don't have that. I can appreciate that. I can read a series through and be like, this will matter later. But man, I'm impressed anytime people can like make a cohesive story out of pieces that don't feel cohesive to me. It's it's an awesome talent that I do not possess.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were, I know that you've done a few other things before this, like smaller pieces, but did you have to do a lot of research for the book, or was it mostly just developing a writing uh style?
I think it was more developing and writing style. Like for this story in particular, there's a little bit of research, but not like a ton. Like the first, so funny thing is when I was 11 and I started writing my first novel, I started off with this big like uh Jane Austen era Charlotte Bronte style, like multi-generational novel, and it was like gonna need all this research and like super complicated. And I'm like, dude, this is my first book. What am I thinking? Starting with a historical fiction that's gonna require like tons of research and time, and I'm freaking 11. So like, and it was this was before internet. So like I was like, I'm biting off a lot more than I can chew. So eventually when I mean, and that's gonna happen someday still, but eventually when I came to this idea, it sort of came from a lot of different things. And of course it came a little bit from all the books that I was reading that the things I didn't like that I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to fix from other books. And I know a lot of people say that, like Harry Potter and Twilight and there's some other ones, but other books they were well written, they were interesting, but there were a lot of things they did that I'm like, I wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't have that kind of character. And if I was doing this is what I do. And I've always been very fascinated by witches and paranormal and fairy tale creatures, mythical things, and so I always knew I wanted at some point to write something like this, but I actually got the idea for this when I was working actually maintenance at Walmart overnight, cleaning floors and stuff. So
Yeah,
my brain wasn't needed. We just go through the same pattern every night. Like, you sweep or you buff, but you go through the same like bloop, bloop, bloop. So my
right.
brain literally didn't need to be in my job. It just, it's just robot at that point. And so my mind was elsewhere, so I can work. And that's when I started thinking about this. And part of where it came from was the whole notion of, well, what would you be good if you were pretty much stamped no matter what you did? Would you
Right.
still do the right
Oh,
thing? And that's at the heart of who Gwen is. And like her struggle is that she's essentially cursed at every turn. The more you get to know about her, the more you realize she really is like everything working against her. And like, because a lot of people talk about, like, especially in like Christianity, how people talk about the rewards you're going to get when you die and like the mansions on high. And that's
right.
why people do good things to be good people so they can get this big reward. But what if there was no reward guaranteed to you after you died? What if there was no blessing, no treasures? Like, what if you just chose to do the right thing because it was the right thing?
Right.
When you're naturally disposed to do the wrong thing and everything pushing you
You're
towards evil.
almost predestined towards the
Yeah. So it's
evil.
like
Yeah.
that's the constant struggle. And from that idea sort of spitballs, well, who would this character be and how would this all happen and how can I incorporate all my favorite fantasy elements and things into an urban fantasy, and so it just kind of became a thing
That's
and
awesome. And
snowballed.
I like that. I might have mentioned this before too, but I like the hero that chooses to be a hero. I I kind of talk about how like we were talking about Harry Potter. He kind of just Mary Sue's into things. Like I get it. Ultimately, he has to choose to be brave. Like I get it. I get it. He's a
Mm-hmm.
good character. But he does kind of just like you never really the story is all about how he's just so inherently good, right? The story is Harry Potter saves the world. You know that backwards and forwards that he's not going to choose Voldemort and he's not going to become some kind of like rogue element that like fights Voldemort his own way. He's always going to be the good guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with Gwen, I like that she has to consistently choose, that she's consistently put up to that. Like she could be the villain and she would be a really good one. And she continually has to choose whether or not she is going to. And sometimes she thinks that she is choosing right, and looks back and goes, "Oh, maybe not." Like, I don't feel like that's really giving anything away because
Yeah, yeah.
that's the way choices work. but but yeah, I like that. I appreciate that. So when you were talking about when you were younger, so I knew you about,
We met in like seventh grade, so
yeah,
12, 13 when there. I was really
yeah.
young.
So right
I'm like,
right
I'm a
towards
baby.
right towards the beginning of your author journey. I feel like in those years, like we did kind of have a bit of like a macabre undertone to a lot of the stuff that we were into.
Hmm.
So do you feel like that kind of played into this? Because you were talking about you were always into like the witches and the supernatural stuff. Did it always kind of have a, because there's some, even in the first book, it starts to get a little bit dark, a little bit darker than like Bethany. I was talking about my daughter that is reading through them, and she was like, "Whoa." I didn't think there was anything that I was like, "Oh, I don't want you reading this." But she was like, "Whoa, man. I didn't I didn't expect that." And I was like, "Oh,
Oh yeah.
oh yeah, not every 16-year-old thinks the
Yeah.
way that Ruth and I thought when we were 16." I was asking about how the like kind of macabre, like did it, is that something that you kind of intended? Did you put that in there on purpose or?
Yeah, I think my big issue is that I was reading books way above my maturity level and appropriateness when I was younger. And I always liked things on the dark side. So I was always gravitating more towards stories that actually felt like they had a real element of danger. And also one of those things that I didn't like about, or that I struggled with books like Harry Potter and Twilight and a lot of books out there, is that, like you were saying, you know the hero's going to be the hero. You know that nothing really, really bad is going to happen. Bad things are going to happen, but they're not going to die. They're not going to turn into the bad guy. Like, so there's kind of a lack of real stakes,
Mhm.
there's no high stakes situation, intensity isn't there because there's nothing really to risk. They're not going to turn evil unless it's Darth Vader, but even then, like, we started off with him in the movies as already evil.
Right.
He didn't start off as Anakin. We already knew him as Darth Vader. So when you do see eventually his story and everything, you're like, oh, this is how he turned bad, and that's fascinating. But it's not the same thing as starting with this young innocent character and being like, are they gonna go bad?
Right.
And I feel like there's a real possibility that they could.
Mhm.
So that's one of the things I liked about that. Plus, so funny thing, so things to warn people about. Um, this does involve some very mature subject matter, like child molestation, and some things like that are touched on or talked about. You don't see it, but it's
Right.
mentioned um, for the most part. And what's funny is when my dad read the book, one of the first things he asked me was like, "Honey, do you need to tell me something? Were you molested as a child?" And I'm like, "Not as far as I know. I mean, unless I suppressed it like way down." But I've always been really fascinated by a lot of my friends have been, and
Mhm.
I've heard their stories and I've watched how that affected them and how they developed, and I've always been very fascinated by the strength of character and personality to be able to rise above that and be able
Mhm.
to I don't know, it just, I've seen how it affects people very differently and different personalities. Some people will take that to themselves. That means that they're a bad person, and because they're not able to deal with it, they then sort of abuse themselves and start to go down a dark path because of what happened to them. And then other
Right.
people, they become very closed off where they can't have intimate relationships, and it like messes up their relationships for the rest of their lives and their ability to be intimate and to have healthy relationships. And I've just noticed all the different ways in which it affects people. And I think the ones that are able to really grow from it and like move past it are able to actually deal with it, and like the strength of that person, that's just such a hard thing to have to overcome. And I really admire the people that are able to do that. And I guess I'm just fascinated by just strong people having to go through real problems. And I think that's one of the things, what's the one of the worst things that can happen to a child? That's one of the worst things that happen to anybody. So it's pretty demoralizing, and it's has quite an effect on you. And it really
Mhm.
does change how you look at yourself.
I like that. So like I said, when I read the book and then Bethany wanted to, I didn't go, well, there is gonna be this part that like, because it didn't strike me, because I was like, yeah, that's real to life, even though it isn't real to our life. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
And it wasn't glorified. Like there are stories that almost feel like they glorify the
Yeah.
abuse.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't glorified. It was presented, it was clear and obvious, and it was kind of dealt with. Like, you know, um, which I appreciate. I think of like when we were talking about flowers in the attic and how that was such an unhealthy situation. And I'm like, it could have gone there. It could have become this whole like side story about this situation, but that isn't the story, and it held true. Like you didn't just dive into that to the point that it almost felt like you were like,
Yeah.
feel this with us, you know, like
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. And I will say that Flowers in the Attic and VC Andrews definitely was one of
Yeah.
my inspirations from back in the day. This was one of like the the authors that I took a lot of in my influence. There you go. She's one of my influences. It's
Yeah.
the VC Andrews, Bronte sisters, Dickens,
Hmm.
and like um Robert Jordan. Those are all kind of somewhat random, but I like to think that if Dickens wrote Witches and Vampires, that's kind of
Hmm.
like VC Andrews meets Dickens. It's kind of like, but with like magic. So
VC Andrews meets Dickens with magic.
with
That's it.
magic,
That's what this is. That's
essentially.
awesome. And that gets one of my other questions. I was going to ask if there were specific authors that inspired you, or that. So there you go. There you have it.
There you go.
Because we're doing indie authors, I like to hear your experience with self-publishing. Like, was there stuff that went wrong? Was there stuff that worked better than you expected? Why did you go self-publishing? All that.
Okay. So originally I did the querying. I did submit my stuff to publishers and agents and stuff. And my original goal was, if I don't get like a good deal after like a year and a half of like trying to get it published traditionally, then I would do it. I would go self-publishing. So I did a lot of research on it, and I was like, yeah, this is something you could feasibly do. This is totally doable. And of course, this was back in 2013, and it wasn't as like popular thing. Like in my critique group, I was the only one attempting it at the time. And so I did it before it was cool, and now like they all do it. So um even some of the ones that were traditionally published are now self-published because it works better for them. But yeah, after a year and a half, I got like one uh offer, but it was sort of like a shady kind of offer. So I was like, I don't feel good about this. Talked to my husband, and I said, I feel like I should go ahead and just self-publish. Um Part of the thing is that when I was researching and stuff, I realized that authors have very little say in how their book ends up looking. And as a graphic designer and illustrator, that was a bit of an issue for me because I'm a very visual person, and I could see all these things. And you know, I wasn't a cover designer at the time, but I eventually became one. Um, because I really wanted to do my own book cover anyway. And I wanted to at least have some say in it. And I kept hearing time and time again from authors that were traditionally published that they had no say at all in what their cover looked like, and a lot of them hated their cover. But anyways, ultimately I decided to go with self-publishing so I could have more control. I also worried about somebody coming and saying, I think the child molestation parts are a little too dark. And like that, so the other thing is that I kind of felt like, so my books, they're not YA, but they're not like adult. They're
Mm-hmm.
somewhere in the middle. And so yeah, they're hard to really classify in that way. Um, I would have been fine reading them when I was younger, but then I read really mature stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a young child that reads mature stuff, then I've had um I've had grandmas that have bought my book and read it, and then they bought it for, or I remember her telling me she bought it as a Christmas present, another copy for her 8 and 12-year-old granddaughters. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so she's read the book.
Right.
She already knows that there's some stuff in there. And she didn't seem to find anything wrong with it. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
like, okay, that's from grandma. So it's
But
not that bad.
right. That's
But
what, like I said, when my daughter wanted to read it, I was like, okay. And then she was like, oh, I did not expect that. And I was like, oh, okay.
yeah, it's the kind of thing like I worry about having my own kids read it because like my 15-year-old wants to read it and he's super sensitive to a lot of things. And I'm like,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have had a problem with it, but I'm not sure about you
Right.
because I think my kids are a lot more innocent than I was.
Yeah.
And I guess I've, raised them to be a little more straight laced or
Yeah.
by the book more.
I'll say I've done that too. Like there are things that like Scott and I will watch, and then like just today we were sitting there with my 13-year-old. She was like, Can I go to so and so's house and watch Stranger Things?" And I'm like, no. I have watched Stranger Things and I love it. I don't think you can handle it." And she's like, "Oh, they were also talking about Umbrella Academy." And I'm like, maybe you can handle that, like, because I know her and I know what she can handle, and and so
Hmm.
then she's like, "Oh, also, can I watch?" And she said something else. It wasn't Game of Thrones, but it was something like that. That I was like, "No."
And she's like listing off, she's like, can I watch this? She's
Right.
like,
I'm like, "Who is this friend again? And why are you going over there to watch stuff?"
why is this friend watching these things? Yeah.
But
And that just makes me think of I don't know, for some reason my parents were big into movies, partially because my dad did end up working in the movie industry, and that was the one thing my family did together was watch movies and then sit there critique it and talk about it and tear it apart.
right.
That's one of the only things we did together as a family, without really killing each other. So that was what we bonded on. So there's a lot of things that like I watched growing up. I'm like, you know what? I was way too young to watch that movie, but
Mhm.
I didn't even think about it because I just grew up watching all these things. And then as my kids get older and I'm wanting to introduce them to all these things that I loved growing up, and I'm like, wait a second, there's a lot of stuff in here that wasn't a big deal to me that they're going to have a problem with.
Right.
Like we actually watched Men in Black the other night for my husband's podcast. Because like he has a podcast with his best friend called Nostalgia Cast, and one of the movies they're doing 90s movies this season, is Men in Black. And so we were like, oh great, let's watch this with the kids. Like we want to see how they react to it and everything. So I know I watched it with them when they were younger, but
Mhm.
I don't think they were paying much attention. So we're like, oh, let's watch it again. And so we sit down with them, and the kids are like, So like they keep saying a bunch of S words, and they're saying GDs, and they're like, oh, they swear a lot in this movie. They just keep swearing. And like, yes, my children are raised not to swear and are very appropriate and
Yeah.
proper or whatever.
Mhm.
And I'm glad. But like I grew up with a lot of this stuff wasn't a big deal
Right.
because, yes, I grew up in like an LDS Christian home where you're not supposed to swear, but my house was kind of like, even my mom swears sometimes. So like I grew up with a lot of like with the mild swearing, not like the big words. So when they flinch or they react to like the mild swearing, I'm like, well, when I think about it, a lot of things that we watched growing up, we watched on TV and they were
Mhm,
edited on cable
mhm.
or so they weren't you know what I mean? They weren't the same thing. So you're watching these things on the DVD and you're going, oh, I don't remember them saying that. I don't remember that.
Right.
I don't remember this.
Yeah, they're moderately censored for TV in the 90s or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's that. Well, even in the theater, because like I saw Men in Black in the theater back in the day or whatever, and I didn't think same thing. I grew up in a very seemingly conservative household, like
Mm-hmm.
socially conservative,
A little more laxed, not so strict,
right?
still religious, but not
But
like, ugh.
not like, yeah. But at the same time, like I can think of the first time that I ever heard my mother use like a foul word, and it was damn it. And I was just like, like I had heard it before. I had heard it plenty from everyone from like my grandma to my brother to, whatever. I would say things, but my mother said it. And I just about had kittens. Like shocked. And so I think of that. Like I think of like my childhood. I was exposed to things, but also not nearly as much as many other children are. And then my children, I don't bubble wrap them, but yeah, kind of the same thing. Like I didn't even remember that there was the mention the guy molesting children until she was like, "Mom,
Oh,
are
did you know this
you,
is in here?
and I was like, yeah, but by the time you came to me, like it was already over and done with in the book. Like she read all the way through, and then she was like, oh, that was intense. And I was like, oh, right. Because
Oh yeah.
sometimes that's
Oh.
part of some people's life experience. Like, lucky you, not yours.
Um, my mother-in-law said like when she read it, those parts were a little difficult for her because she had experiences when she was a child. And so she was like, those were a little hard to read, or she would have to have a moment,
Hmm.
but she still read it. And I was like, okay. So I do know people who've experienced
Yeah.
that, who read it and still been able to do it. And then there's other people where they can't handle any of those kind of things at all. They just
Hmm.
stay away from it. So,
Hmm. And that,
it's kind of to your discretion. Like if you can handle it,
right.
we don't
Well,
go
and
into great detail, but still.
I wonder too, because like I had experiences in my past, like I said, like hearing my mother say a word that was, unacceptable was a big deal. Also, other experiences that I had had that I had already processed. And so I can read about them or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's unfortunate. Good thing she's working through it. But then there are other things like the omen or even dark water, I think is what it's called. Like when it's like children being possessed or children being, I can't do it. I can't do it. I just like there's something that like shakes me to my core because it's a
Just too
force that I
icky.
can't, like I can't control Satan or whatever. Like I can control a man who is doing this negative thing. I can take you out of that situation, or I can stop him or turn him in or whatever it is. Like there's
An
power
evil
there.
spirit. You feel a
Yeah.
little less control there.
Yeah. And so for me, a human doing a horrible thing to another human is horrible. Also, I can handle it. A demon possessing a child, like I'm like, nope, nope, you've gone too far. Like I can't handle it. So
Well, if technically we have more power than spirits do, but that's a whole nother story.
when I read it, it's a little bit different than when I watch it for some reason. Like
Mm-hmm.
I process
Yes.
it differently. I can read something that I just go, oh, and keep reading
Mm-hmm.
more than I can watch it on the screen and just like I just can't. I just can't. So that's just
Yeah,
me.
I
But
agree. I think there's certain things that like when you're reading, you can say, okay, I can skip this part, or it's up to you to decide how graphic you
right,
imagine it.
right.
So it's in your head. But like when you see it, I don't know, I guess it's different because when you see it, somebody is physically actually going through the motions of doing those things.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody, and like it's different. It's very different.
It is
Um,
different.
So yeah, it's the interesting thing about the mediums is that in some ways you get a lot more from a book as far as like background and details,
Mhm.
but as far as like intensity and like realism, you get more of that from a
Yeah.
movie, and where it's just like,
Maybe it goes back to that same thing. I have more control. When I'm reading it, I have more control of how I visualize it. I
mhm.
don't have any control when someone else put it on the screen and I just am witnessing it.
You're like, yeah.
So
Anyways,
we've
any other questions?
yeah, well, I've got one more that I wanted to throw in there before we wrap it up, and we've kind of addressed it a little bit because I was going to ask you about the balance of, because you're a mother of five and you're an author of several things, but most predominantly the series. So kind of the balance of like maintaining a large family and home life and the podcast and the other crafts that you do, like all the different things that you're doing with family. How are you finding that balance, or do
Do
you
I
have
have that
that
down?
balance?
I have it more now because my youngest is in kindergarten now, so I'm having more time to
Mhm.
write. But it's actually, so I guess it's sort of a testament to how difficult it is to manage the fact that it's been 8 years since the second book came out. So, and the third book had its challenges, just as the book, but also my husband lost a job. We moved across country, then we moved across country again, and I had another baby. Like, so lots of things happened to sort of contribute to the problem, but also the book itself had a lot of issues that needed to be ironed out, and it kind of took a lot of time. Um, but yeah, for me, I work a lot at night. I'm working more during the day now that I actually have time during the day. Um, but my biggest problem is I'm not a morning person.
Mhm.
So like I get up and I have to get up, take everybody to school, get everybody going, whatever. And then when I come back from dropping off my teenager at high school, I am so tired. I want to go back to sleep.
Yeah.
And then like if I let myself, I would sleep until noon and then wake up and be like, oh crap, I've only got a couple hours to work and clean house and do all these other things before I have to go pick everybody up again. And like once they get home, it's like all five of them all blah 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 talking to mom at the same time. And they're more than aware that other people are talking to me too, but they don't care because they're the most important person at that moment.
Sure.
And I need to pay attention to them. And it's like, you see these other people, right? You hear them, but no, that's not how it works. Kids aren't aware of that. They just know that they have something they want to tell you, and they're going to tell you, regardless of whether you could hear them or not. But you need to pay attention.
Right.
You need to hear it. So, I feel like it's a lot of work. But if you think of it more in terms of not so much how much writing you get done, but hey, I got something done. Like you
Mhm.
carve out 20 minutes a day, or you find time, like when you're waiting in the car to pick up your kids, you can write a little on your phone. And that's one of the cool things is that with smartphones, there's so much you can do. And like you can also dictate on your phone, which, works better if you're have a clearer voice. Like um dictation doesn't work great for me because the phone doesn't know what I'm saying half the time. And every time I would say Gwen, it thought I was saying when. So I have to go back in and like change Gwen to
Mhm.
Win to Gwen. And like there were different words where it was like, but it's still, you do what you can to make it work. I know people that dictate their whole novels and they're able to do that. Um, but it's sort of finding what works for you and finding the rhythm. Um, for me, I'm just more awake at night. That's when my energy, my juices are flowing. That's when I have my ideas the most. I'm just a zombie in the morning. So, like, yes, I have more time in the morning now, but it's like, problem is I'm still better at writing at night.
Right.
So I'm having to kind of balance between don't stay up too late that I can't get up in the morning to take kids to school, but I still sort of working at night. But I'm trying to find the balance between the two. But um, yeah, I think what's important to remember as self-published author is that there is no one set way to do it. Like you write how you write. Like figure out the routine that works for you. Like you don't have to have a book out every year. And there's some people that have multiple books out in a year. And I don't know how these people do it. I'm like, are you crazy? Like how? And I know people that have 4, 5 kids and they're putting out 4 or 5 books a year. And I'm like, who are you? Who are you? But that's them. And they have a way in which they're able to figure that out. And like, they're able to get in-laws to come watch their kids for 2 weeks. And their husband does everything for a couple of weeks or whatnot. And I'm like, I don't have that husband. There's no way he would be like, okay, yeah, how do y'all do it? I'll take care of the kids for 2 weeks. No way. If I'm here, he's going to expect me to help out.
Right.
Because he likes to do everything together. He doesn't like to be left alone with them unless he has to. He feels like he can do the parenting when it's the two of us, but when it's by himself, if I'm around, he's going to get me involved. Like it just, I have to be gone someplace. Like if I go on a retreat, then he can't bother me and I'm gone for 3 days. And I get a lot of writing done that way. If you can go on retreats, if you happen to have a friend who has a very wealthy father who has a couple $1 million cabin in the woods somewhere and you can go for free every year or so, then by all means, I recommend it. It just so happens that worked out for me that one of the people in my writers group has a cabin in the middle of the woods. So it's like, hey, but I know other people that they make their own retreats. Like they go check into a hotel room for the weekend and they just write. And, they just figure out what works for them and they find the time. And like there's no set window for how long it can take you to write your book or really how it has to be. You figure out what works for you. And like again, when it comes back to writing your stories, I mean, yes, in some ways it would be easier and more marketable if I wrote a young adult novel or a middle grade book without all the dark, grown up mature stuff in it. But that wouldn't be the book I would write. And that wouldn't interest me. So ultimately you have to write the book you want to write and not so much write the book that's gonna sell because you really don't know. There's one of my friends that is fairly well-to-do as a self-published author. She was traditionally published at first with a nonfiction book that she did. And then she had this idea for this is dystopian. And she pitched it to her publisher and they're like, oh, dystopians are gone. Dystopians are out. Nobody's interested in dystopians. It's dead. And she was like, well, I'm not going to just like can it or just shelve it and never. So she decided, after looking into it, okay, I'll self-publish. And you know what? She does really well. And, she was able to build a career off of that. And she switched over to self-publishing. So sometimes the publishers don't know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
And there's some people are like, oh, vampires are totally over. And it's like, no, that's not true. For people that love vampires, it's never over. Right. People love werewolves. It'll always be werewolves.
Yep.
Like those kind of people, you'll find your audience and the people that are looking for your book, they'll be there. Yep. It's just a matter of writing the book that you feel right about writing and that you're passionate about. So yeah.
That's cool. I had this idea that I may or may not accomplish, but it involves writing. And I was like, oh, it'd be so great, blah, blah, blah. And I kind of lined it out and I like put it down on paper as far as like my outline or whatever. And then I was like, but what time do I have to dedicate to this? And I sort of set it to the side. And that was in June. And I understand it's only been a few months, but that was in June. And it's now October. And I have done 0 things since putting that outline down on paper.
It
And so,
happens.
yeah, if there are other authors out there, I guess kind of the message is to find a way to make it work for you. It's kind of, yeah, yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing that I think people forget is that you're always writing. If you're thinking about your characters, you're thinking about the dialogue, you're figuring it out, that's still writing because that all has to be done before you sit down and type.
Right.
So you're writing all the time as long as you're working on it in your head and you're thinking about it, you're still in the process. So that's still writing in a way. So
That's cool. That's
yeah.
encouraging. It's encouraging for me. I assume it will be encouraging for others as well. All right. So then before we let you take off, because it's way later for you than it is for me. It's like 11 o'clock for me. So I don't know what time it is for
Yeah.
you, but
Survive.
this is prime writing time, right? But so book one is essentially introductions. It's an introduction to Gwen and her world, and kind of her being introduced to her own like abilities and realizing that her situation is different from what she thought she was, and answers a few questions and brings in a million more. And then book two is also kind of an introduction, because isn't book two, I forget where one book ends and the next begins, but we're introduced to the other side. She's been in her mundania, her mundane world, and then
Mundania. I love that.
yeah.
I love that. That's the best word ever.
And now book two, she is taken into the other side, right?
Yeah, to like the Forsaken, to
Right.
the other tribes of Cain, and it's where she learns about the tribes of Cain, and she learns
Right.
about the solar world.
And I might be giving a little bit of a little bit of a game away, but the Book of Lilith, I was so enthralled with the Book of Lilith. Like I love that. So
Yeah, I think someday I'll write it as its own little companion book, like the whole thing, and you can be like, here, the companion book, the Book of Lilith.
that would be cool.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. So then book three, anything that you want to say about where we go with book three?
Okay, so book three is essentially what happens after book two.
Right. Sure.
So one of the things that does happen in book two is she meets the vampires and a bunch of other tribes of Cain, and she goes to sort of an introductory into that world. Book three is kind of after the aftermath of all that and everything, the craziness that happens in the second book. And she kind of returns back to the human world, but she's older now. She's a late teen. She's like 17, 18, somewhere in there. And she's, she knows her powers now. She knows to be a little wary of the other side, but she also knows to be wary of the human side. And she's trying to sort of live in the middle where she's still being a witch, but she's doing it in a way in which nobody knows she's really a witch. Right. So there's that element. And so she's trying to find a balance, but she's there with her two best friends, Morna the fairy and Raven the werewolf. And they're trying to sort of hack out a regular life while being different. And of course that doesn't work out because eventually it catches up to them. And on top of that, other things, crazy things happen with the vampires. So there's that. Vampires declare war on everybody. So then that sort of plays into it. And that's essentially what the decree is the vampires decreeing, hey, we're going to let the world know that we exist and we're going to start just killing everybody. So stay out of our way, the rest of you.
Yep.
Yeah, well, totally cool. Forbidden and against the rules, but we don't care. So then now it's just kind of, if anybody interferes with them, then they're declaring war amongst the tribes. And anyways, it ties in, but it's kind of like, anyways. So yeah, there's a lot that Gwen has to go through with that book and that story, and kind of figuring out how to navigate all that. And she meets a group of witches that she ends up having to get along with and deal with, and she eventually is going to end up going into a regular coven. So and this will be very different for her because she was in an orphanage with humans, then she was kind of a refugee with vampires and this mountain fortress in the second book, and now suddenly she's thrust in with witches, and now she has to figure out what's considered traditional for a witch to do because she's never lived that life. So
cool.
It'll be very interesting. Again, Gwen's always a fish out of water in some way or another. So yeah. So cool. I'm excited. I really I love this book. It's been a labor of love, but it's been worth all the extra time we've put into it, and I'm excited for everybody else to get to enjoy it. So
awesome.
Yeah.
I'm looking
December
forward to
10th.
it. So December 10th. That's the decree. That gives it a little bit of time for getting the others. I have Forsaken here. I have the old Forsaken here. And then why can I not remember what the second one is called?
The Offspring.
The Offspring. Oh, I was like, the children. Wait, that's the series. So the series is the 13 Tribes of Cain.
Yeah. The Offspring.
Offspring. So grab them both. Give yourself a little time to read through them before December 10th, or just get them all and just have a fun new year.
Yeah, you'll be reading for a while because the second one's big and the third one's even bigger.
I was gonna say they're hefty. Oh, it's in the.
That's about like a normal book size. Like
this is the little one.
The next one is like twice the size, and then the next one's like a little bit more. I actually can't wait till I have like the physical copy of book 3 because I'm dying to see how huge it is. Because it's a whopper. It's a big book. It's not a 1,000-page novel or anything, but this is the biggest thing I've ever written. So
cool. Yeah. I'm here for that. All right.
Anyways, so yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you. So RJ Craddock, we do have, you can, Amazon, I'm guessing.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere online.
Okay. I usually get
be able to order it through your library. You can request it and they'll get it. So yeah. And
then also at the Paperback Flicks website, paperbackflicks.com, we do have links to RJ Craddock, RK Lee. I think right now that might be all that we have. And then
but future authors will also get on there.
Yeah. All of that. We're gonna keep them all up so you can find their stuff there too. So
very cool.
All right. Well, before we head out, next time, do you have any idea what we're doing?
I think I picked the last one.
You did,
so
and then
I have to pick this one. I know you're like pushing it off.
Well,
or at least it feels like it.
Because there's one of two ways that I can go. So I can do like the kind of, I don't know. I've been thinking about doing To Kill a Mockingbird, but I don't know if that's what I want to do right now.
Okay. Well, what are the options you're thinking?
So my other options are kind of similar to ones that I've already taken. I feel like To Kill a Mockingbird is something a little bit different. It's a genre that we haven't done a lot of. So I think that I want to land there. Sound good?
Okay.
All right. So To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
All right. Well.
All right. So we'll see you guys next time.
Yep. Thanks for watching. I'm Rae Davidson. I'm here with RJ Craddock, also known
as Ruth.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Bye.